The millionaire invited his ex-girlfriend to his wedding ceremony. His intention was to humiliate her during the lavish party. But the tables turned dramatically when she arrived with a companion who shared his exact face. Before hearing this passionate tale of a lost twin brother, an ex-girlfriend who kept secrets, and a wedding that unraveled a lifetime of lies, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. The Rosewood Castle Ballroom was a sight to behold. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above elegant flower arrangements of white and gold roses. In his dressing room, Nathan Miller stood alone, staring at an invitation card. His fingers traced over the name Rachel Parker, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. Parker occupied the room next to his mother's and had been separated since becoming Rachel's boyfriend. Rachel had left him 5 years ago when his business failed. All she left was a note saying she couldn't build a future on dreams. Now, Nathan was one of the city's top businessmen, and he had planned this extravagant wedding to show everyone, especially Rachel, just how successful he'd become. Down the hall, his bride-to-be, Sophia Bennett, was preparing for the ceremony. She looked stunning in her custom-designed white gown, her smile radiant as she got the final touches of makeup. Sophia came from a wealthy family and seemed perfect in every way. But she had no idea that Nathan had planned this lavish wedding for reasons beyond their love. Nathan checked his bow tie one last time in the mirror. "Everything has to be perfect," he whispered. The guest list included all the important people in the city, business leaders, celebrities, and socialites. But one name mattered more than the others. He had personally written Rachel's invitation, imagining how she would feel seeing his success. But fate had other plans for Nathan's perfect day. As the guests gathered in the ballroom, surprised whispers began to spread. Rachel had arrived wearing an elegant midnight blue dress. However, it wasn't just her presence that caused the stir. It was the man standing beside her. Someone who looked exactly like Nathan. The music seemed to fade as guests started pointing and whispering. Everyone could see that this mysterious man had Nathan's face, his height, even his way of standing. Nathan's carefully planned day of triumph was about to turn into something completely unexpected. His past was coming back in a way he never could have imagined. In this moment, Nathan's bed behind the kitchen sink closed the door completely and climbed into bed. The ballroom fell silent as a man walked through the crowd. He looked exactly like Nathan. "Hello, Nathan. I'm Ethan, your twin brother." Nathan froze in place. "Twin brother? What kind of joke is this?" He looked from Ethan to Rachel, who stood quietly beside him. "It's not a joke," Ethan said. He took out an envelope and handed it to Nathan. "Look for yourself." Inside were old photos of 2 identical baby boys. There were also hospital records with both their names. Nathan's hands shook as he stared at the papers. This can't be real." Sophia rushed out in her white dress. "Nathan, what's going on?" She looked at Ethan in shock. "Who is this?" Before Nathan could answer, Rachel stepped forward. "I met Ethan while he was searching for you, Nathan. He's been looking for his brother his whole life. But my father never told me." Nathan's voice trailed off. "Of course he didn't," Ethan said quietly. "He wanted to keep us apart." The wedding guests watched in stunned silence. The string quartet had stopped playing. Nathan kept looking between the photos and his twin brother's face. His perfect wedding day had just turned upside down. "We need to talk," Ethan said. "There's so much you don't know." Sophia grabbed Nathan's arm. "Nathan? What about the wedding?" But Nathan couldn't take his eyes off his brother. The truth was standing right in front of him. wearing his own face. The whispers grew louder as the mysterious man walked forward through the crowd. Nathan stepped out of his dressing room just in time to see his own face staring back at him. The man's voice was calm but firm as he spoke. "Hello, Nathan. I'm Ethan, your twin brother." Nathan's world seemed to stop. Twin brother? This must be some kind of joke. His voice shook with disbelief as he looked from Ethan to Rachel, who stood quietly nearby. The guests watched in shocked silence as this scene unfolded before them. "It's no joke," Ethan said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out an old envelope and handed it to Nathan. Inside were yellowed photographs of two identical baby boys, along with hospital records confirming their birth. Nathan's hands trembled as he looked at the evidence. Sophia had now emerged from her dressing room, drawn by the commotion. She rushed to Nathan's side, her white dress rustling. "Nathan, what's happening? Who is this man?" Her voice was filled with confusion and concern. But Nathan couldn't answer. He was still staring at the photos in his hands. Rachel stepped forward, her blue dress contrasting with Sophia's white. "I met Ethan 6 months ago when he was searching for you, Nathan. He's been looking for his twin brother his whole life." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The elegant ballroom, which minutes ago had been filled with excited wedding chatter, was now completely silent. Everyone watched as Nathan struggled to process this revelation. His perfect day, planned as a showcase of his success, had turned into something entirely different. For the first time in his life, Nathan Miller was faced with a truth he couldn't control or deny. He had a twin brother, and nothing would ever be the same again. "I have proof," Ethan said, pulling out more documents. "Birth certificates, DNA tests, everything." The crowd watched as Nathan studied the papers. The evidence was clear. They were identical twins, born at St. Mary's Hospital. There were even childhood photos of them together as babies before they were separated. "But how did you find me?" Nathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't easy," Ethan replied. "I spent years searching. Then I met Rachel." Rachel stepped forward, her blue dress rustling. "I recognized your face immediately when I met Ethan. At first I thought it was you. So that's why you came back into my life?" Nathan turned to Rachel, hurt in his eyes. "No, Nathan. I helped Ethan because it was the right thing to do. He deserved to find his brother." Sophia stood watching, tears in her eyes. "Nathan, did you invite Rachel to our wedding just to show off? To prove something?" Nathan couldn't answer. His carefully planned revenge was falling apart. The truth was coming out. All of it. "Your father kept us apart," Ethan explained. "He took you after the divorce, told you Mother was dead. But she's alive, Nathan. She's been waiting to see you all these years." Guests began whispering among themselves. Some were already leaving, sensing this was no longer a celebration, but a family crisis. When they finally finished, the whole camp looked cranked, like they had just been through a physical spectacle. "Our mother? She's alive?" Nathan sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Rachel touched Ethan's arm gently. "Tell him about the letters, Ethan." "Mother wrote to you every month," Ethan said. "Father kept all her letters, never told you about them. Never told you about me." Nothing said. Mothers slip into the past. Nathan looked up at his brother, seeing his own face filled with years of pain and longing. The perfect wedding day he had planned was now the day his entire world changed forever. "I need to know everything," Nathan said finally. "Every detail." Sophia removed her veil slowly. I think the wedding needs to wait," he said. The ballroom was emptying now, but Nathan barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on his twin brother and the stack of letters that held the truth about his past. Sophia stood alone in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection. The beautiful wedding dress she'd chosen so carefully now felt like a costume. Outside, she could hear cars leaving the castle grounds as guests departed, whispering about the dramatic events that had unfolded. "I don't even know who he really is," she said softly to herself. Over the past year, Nathan had always changed the subject when family came up. He'd talk about his business success, their future plans, anything but his past. Now she understood why. Taking off her veil, Sophia thought about all the signs she'd missed. Nathan had been so focused on making this wedding perfect, on impressing everyone. She'd thought it was just his way of showing his love. Now she realized he had other motives. The diamond ring sparkled on her finger, but its beauty couldn't hide the truth anymore. Sophia knew what she had to do. A marriage needed trust, and right now, that trust was broken. Down the hall in Nathan's study, two identical brothers faced each other. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. After 2 rings, he persuaded the brothers to join him. "You had the perfect life," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "You got to live in this mansion with William, while Elizabeth and I struggled just to get by." Nathan shook his head. "Perfect? You have no idea what it was like. Father pushed me constantly. Nothing was ever good enough, and I was alone. I never knew I had a brother to share it with." "At least you had Father," Ethan stood up, his voice rising. "Mother worked day and night to raise me. Every year on our birthday, she'd bake 2 cakes, one for me and one for the brother we hoped would come home someday." Nathan felt like each word was a punch to his gut. He remembered all his lonely birthdays in this big house, with just William's cold congratulations to celebrate. "Why didn't you find me before?" Nathan asked quietly. "Why wait until my wedding day?" Tillen chuckled. "I tried for years," Ethan replied, "but Father made sure we couldn't find you. He moved houses, hired lawyers, hid all the records. It wasn't until I met Rachel that I finally had help, breaking through all his lies." Nathan looked out the window and saw Sophia walking in the garden, her white dress glowing in the evening light. In just one day, his whole world had turned upside down. He had a brother he never knew about, and the perfect life he thought he had was built on lies. "Tell me everything," he said to Ethan. "I need to know the truth, all of it. I owe Sophia that much." In William Miller's luxurious office, Nathan and Ethan sat across from their father's massive oak desk. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, highlighting the family photos on the wall, all carefully edited to show only Nathan and William through the years. "You lied to me," Nathan's voice was quiet but firm. "All these years, you told me Mother died in a car accident." William's usually confident demeanor faltered. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened papers on his desk. "I did what I thought was best for you." Best? Ethan leaned forward. "You tore our family apart. You kept us from knowing each other, knowing our mother." "Elizabeth was unstable back then," William defended himself. "She couldn't provide the life I wanted for." "Stop lying," Nathan slammed his hand on the desk. "I found Mother's letters, every single one you kept from me. She wasn't unstable. She was heartbroken because you took her son away." The room fell silent. William looked suddenly older, the weight of his decades of deception showing in his face. Memories began flooding back to Nathan. A faint recollection of a warm kitchen, the smell of cookies, a little boy exactly like him playing beside him. He remembered the day William took him away, remembered looking back through the car window. "I remember that day," he said softly. "I remember Ethan crying, reaching for me. I remember Mother trying to run after the car." His voice broke. "You told me that was just a dream. You made me believe my own memories were lies." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I never forgot that day either. I kept asking Mother when you were coming back. She would just hold me and cry. William stood up, walking to the window. The divorce was messy. I couldn't risk losing everything. Nathan was my heir, my future. Weller protested that he was already the founder and CEO of the company he worked for, but Nathan kept quiet on the matter, relying on his sanity. I was your son. Nathan's voice rose. Not your heir, not your business project, your son. And Ethan was my brother. We deserved to know each other, to grow up together. Repressed sighs from members. Nathan said, I know you're hurting, Mad. The childhood memories kept coming now. Birthday parties where something always felt missing. Christmas mornings that seemed somehow incomplete. All those years of feeling like half of something, never understanding why. We can't get those years back, Ethan said quietly. But we can stop letting your lies control our future, Father. William turned back to face his sons, seeing for the first time how identical they truly were, not just in appearance, but in the pain and determination in their eyes. His carefully constructed world of control and manipulation was crumbling before him. William slumped into his chair, looking defeated for the first time in his son's memory. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, making him appear older and more vulnerable than ever before. I never meant, he started, then stopped, searching for words. Everything I did was to protect what I thought was important. The business, our family name, our legacy. Henry, but what about love? Nathan's voice was bitter. What about the real legacy? Two brothers who never knew each other existed. Before William could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Sophia stood there in a simple blue dress, her wedding gown long since put away. Her eyes were clear and determined as she stepped into the office. Mr. Miller, she addressed William directly. I need to speak with Nathan. William nodded, seemingly relieved at the interruption. But Sophia wasn't finished. Actually, I think you should all hear this. She moved to stand beside Nathan's chair. I've spent the last day thinking about what love really means, what family means. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. Nathan, I fell in love with the man who showed me kindness, who dreamed big dreams. Not the man who planned our wedding as some kind of revenge. It took me 6 months and a whole bunch of doctor's appointments before I even led him to the garage to observe me. Nathan started to speak, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I still love you, but I need to know who you really are. Not the perfect businessman you pretend to be, but the real you. The boy who lost his brother, who missed his mother without even knowing it. Ethan watched quietly, seeing the quiet strength in this woman who should have been his sister-in-law today. William, too, seemed transfixed by her words. The wedding can wait, Sophia continued. First, you need to heal your family. All of you do. She looked pointedly at William. And Mr. Miller, that includes you. You can't keep living behind your walls of pride and control. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. William stared at his desk, fingers tracing the edge of an old photo frame. Nathan reached for Sophia's hand, holding it like a lifeline. She's right, Ethan said softly. Mother always said time doesn't heal wounds, love does. Maybe it's time we all learned that lesson. There's something else you need to know, Ethan said quietly, pulling an old leather album from his bag. It's about Elizabeth, our mother. Nathan tensed at the word mother, still struggling to accept that the woman he'd mourned had been alive all these years. Rachel, who had been silently watching from the doorway, stepped into the room. Show him, Ethan, she encouraged softly. He needs to know everything. I began to make progress. Ethan opened the album, revealing pages of carefully preserved letters. Mother never stopped writing to you, Nathan, every week for 20 years. William returned them unopened, but she kept copies of every single one. Nathan's hands trembled as he took the album. The first letter was dated just days after the separation. The second letter was dated just days before the separation. My dearest Nathan, today you asked for chocolate chip pancakes, but I wasn't there to make them. I hope you still remember how we used to make them together on Sunday mornings. She's waiting to see you, Ethan continued gently. She runs a small bookstore in Boston. Every birthday, she sets aside a book she thinks you'd love. There's a whole shelf of them, waiting for you. Rachel moved closer, her presence somehow calming the tension in the room. I've met Elizabeth, she said. She's the strongest, most loving person I know. Even after everything that happened, she never spoke a word of hatred about William. She just wanted her sons to find each other again. I told you it would take time. Elizabeth asked me to speak with her too. Ellery replied. I've told her. Nathan looked up, tears in his eyes. All these years, I've visited an empty grave. Father even put flowers there on my birthday. You don't have to visit a grave anymore, Rachel said softly. You can visit a bookstore instead. You can hug your mother, hear her laugh, let her make you those chocolate chip pancakes again. Sophia, who had been quietly listening, squeezed Nathan's hand. We should go, she said. All of us. It's time this family stopped living with ghosts and started living with truth. The weight of 20 years of lies and loss hung in the air. But something else was there too. Hope. Fragile but growing stronger with each revealed truth, each shared tear, each step toward healing. Nathan stood in the grand ballroom where just hours ago his perfect wedding was supposed to take place. Now the empty space echoed with possibility rather than regret. He turned to face the small group that remained. Sophia, Ethan, Rachel, and even William, who looked lost without his usual mask of authority. The wedding needs to wait, Nathan announced, his voice firm but gentle. We need time to heal, to understand, to rebuild what was broken. Sophia stepped forward, removing her engagement ring. Not waiting, she corrected with a soft smile, just postponing until we can celebrate with your whole family. Angelina produced the portrait of Mary. Our whole family, Ethan added quietly. Nathan looked at the ring in Sophia's hand, then at the faces around him. For the first time in his life, he felt complete, even in this moment of apparent loss. It's time to meet our mother, he said finally. The next morning, Nathan and Ethan stood outside their father's corporate office, the gleaming skyscraper a testament to William Miller's empire. The same building that had once symbolized Nathan's success now felt cold and imposing. They shared a knowing look before stepping into the elevator. William was waiting in his corner office, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows. He turned as they entered, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something more fragile. I assumed you'd come, he said quietly. You want answers? Willem asked. We want the truth, Nathan replied, placing the bundle of returned letters on the massive desk. All of it. William sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. I convinced myself I was protecting you, Nathan, from the uncertainty, from the struggle. Your mother, Elizabeth, she had nothing after the divorce. Except love, Ethan interjected. She had enough love for both of us even when one was missing. Nathan opened the first letter from the bundle, his mother's elegant handwriting filling the page. The paper was yellowed with age, but the words were clear. Dearest Nathan, another Christmas without you. I wrapped your present anyway, a book of constellations, because you always loved the stars. Ethan says the brightest star must be where you are. Ethan Mackle. His hands trembled as he read. Each letter was filled with love, hope, and unwavering devotion. Stories of everyday moments he'd missed, dreams his mother had held on to, pieces of a life he should have shared. She sent one every week, Ethan said softly. Even when they came back unopened, she kept writing. She said, somehow, someday, you'd read them. William reached for a letter with shaking hands. I kept them all, he admitted. Every single one. I told myself I was being strong, but I was just afraid. Afraid you'd choose her over me. Afraid of losing the son I'd raised alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the office, highlighting the three men caught in a web of decades-old decisions and their consequences. The truth was finally emerging, one letter at a time. William's voice cracked as he finally revealed the truth that had haunted him for decades. The divorce wasn't what you think, he said, pulling an old file from his desk drawer. I was failing back then. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Elizabeth, she wanted us to start over, somewhere smaller, together as a family. But your pride wouldn't let you, Ethan said quietly. I couldn't bear the thought of failure, William admitted. When Elizabeth threatened to leave with both of you to give you a normal life instead of this, I panicked. I used what little money I had left to hire lawyers to separate you, to create a story about her death. As William spoke, a memory suddenly flooded back to Nathan, one he'd buried deep in his mind. He was 6 years old, playing near the lake behind their old house. He'd slipped on the wet rocks, fallen into the deep water, but before panic could set in, small hands had grabbed him, pulled him to safety. It was you, Nathan turned to Ethan, his eyes wide with realization. That day at the lake, I always thought it was a dream, but it was you who saved me. Ethan nodded slowly. Mother had brought me to see you secretly. We watched you playing from the trees. When you fell, his voice trailed off. After that, Father moved you away completely, changed houses, changed schools. I remember the hands pulling me up, Nathan said softly. They felt like my own hands. I never understood why until now. William buried his face in his hands. After that incident, I convinced myself the separation was necessary. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was just protecting myself, my pride, my fear of losing control. The truth hung heavy in the air between them, decades of lies unraveling in the morning light. In the quiet corner of a downtown cafe, Sophia sat across from Rachel, 2 cups of untouched coffee growing cold between them. The bustling city life outside the window seemed distant compared to the weight of their conversation. Tell me about him, Sophia asked softly. The real Nathan, the one you knew before. Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. He was different then. Softer, more vulnerable, before he built all these walls around himself. The bankruptcy destroyed his father's company, and Nathan, he took it as his personal failure. Is that why you left? Prunai asked. I left because he stopped letting anyone in. He was so focused on proving himself, on rebuilding everything, that he forgot how to just be human. Rachel paused, meeting Sophia's eyes. But you made him smile again. I saw that at the wedding, before everything happened. As they talked, fate was weaving another thread of its tapestry. At the old cemetery across town, Nathan stood before the empty grave that had represented his mother for so many years. He hadn't expected to find Ethan there, but somehow it felt right. I used to bring flowers here, Nathan said, breaking the silence. Every birthday, every Mother's Day. Talking to a stone while she was alive, running a bookstore, waiting for me. Ethan placed a gentle hand on his brother's shoulder. She kept every book she wanted to give you. 20 years of birthday presents, Christmas gifts, graduation celebrations. She said someday you'd come home to claim them. The brothers stood together, mirror images sharing the same pain, the same hope. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting two identical shadows on the ground. "I think it's time," Nathan said quietly. "Time to go home." The empty grave before them no longer held the power it once did. It was just a symbol of the lies that had shaped their lives, lies that were finally crumbling away to reveal the truth beneath. Later that evening, as the city lights began to twinkle, Rachel and Nathan sat in the garden of the Rosewood Castle. The wedding decorations were gone, but the roses still bloomed, their fragrance filling the cool evening air. Lady Tibetan ceased. "I need to understand something," Nathan said quietly. "How did you find Ethan?" Rachel's eyes softened with memory. "He found me, actually. I was leaving my office one night, and suddenly there was your face. But it wasn't you. He looked exhausted, like he'd been searching forever. He showed me pictures, told me about Elizabeth, about the years he spent trying to find you." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Ethan worked 3 jobs to hire private investigators. He spent every spare moment searching through old records, following leads. Some nights, he'd sleep in his car to save money for the search. Nathan's hands tightened around his armrest. All those years he'd spent building his empire, his brother had been searching for him, sacrificing everything. Suddenly, a crash from inside the castle interrupted their conversation. They rushed inside to find William collapsed on the marble floor, clutching his chest. Ethan was already there, kneeling beside their father. "William," Ethan said, trying to steady himself. "Call an ambulance," Ethan shouted, checking William's pulse. "He just grabbed his chest and fell." Nathan froze for a split second, old resentments warring with concern. Then he was moving, helping Ethan lift their father onto the couch while Rachel called for help. "Stay with us, Father," Ethan urged, his voice gentle despite everything. "We still have so much to talk about, so much to fix." William's eyes flickered between his 2 sons. Identical faces filled with the same worry. His hand reached out, grasping weakly for both of them. In that moment, all the lies and manipulations fell away, leaving only a father and his sons, facing the possibility of loss before healing could begin. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air, and Nathan realized that despite everything, he wasn't ready to lose his father, not now, not when truth was finally having its day. After leaving the hospital that morning, Sophia asked Nathan to meet her in the castle's garden. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. William was stable after his surgery, but the scare had shaken everyone. "Last night changed something," Sophia said softly, sitting on a stone bench. "Watching you with your father, with Elizabeth, I saw a different Nathan Miller." Riley's favorite old game came to mind. He grasped the ball tight. His eyes glazed over. Nathan loosened his tie, still wrinkled from the long night at the hospital. "I hardly know who I am anymore," he admitted. "Everything I built was based on proving something, showing everyone I could succeed. But now, that's exactly what we need to talk about," Sophia said, her voice gentle but firm. "I fell in love with a man who showed me kindness, who had dreams, not someone trying to prove his worth through a perfect wedding or business success." She took his hand, squeezing it softly. "I need to know who you really are, Nathan. The boy who lost his brother, who missed his mother without knowing it. Can you find him again?" The question hung between them like a delicate thread. Nathan thought about his father in the hospital bed, suddenly seeming so human and fallible. He thought about Elizabeth's tears when she rushed into the waiting room, about the way she held both his and Ethan's hands as they waited for news. "I want to," he whispered. "I need to." That afternoon, Nathan and Ethan began their journey to their mother's bookstore. The drive was quiet, both brothers lost in thought about the dramatic events of the past few days. They had left William recovering in the hospital, with Elizabeth promising to keep them updated on his condition. They had spent more time with Irene in Varick's home than they thought they would ever get back. "She reads every morning before opening the shop," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "An hour of quiet time with her coffee and whatever book speaks to her that day." He paused, glancing at his brother. "She has a whole shelf of books she saved for you, one for every birthday, every Christmas." Nathan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. The perfect image he'd built of himself, successful businessman Nathan Miller, was crumbling, revealing the lost son beneath. But maybe, he thought, that's exactly who he needed to be right now. The coastal town appeared ahead of them, its quiet streets and salt air a world away from the corporate towers Nathan was used to. Elizabeth's books and stories waited on Main Street, its window display warm and inviting in the afternoon sun. It was time to find his way home. The bell above the door chimed softly as Nathan and Ethan entered the bookstore. Elizabeth stood frozen, the book she'd been holding slipping from her hands and landing with a quiet thud. Time seemed to stand still as mother and son looked at each other for the first time in 20 years. "Nathan?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. She took a hesitant step forward, her hand reaching out but stopping short of touching him, as if afraid he might disappear. "Is it really you?" "Ha!" Nathan couldn't speak. The woman before him was both familiar and strange. Her dark hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines around her eyes that hadn't been there in his childhood memories. But her eyes were exactly as he remembered, warm and full of unconditional love, as though she were awakened and took on a life of her own. "It's me, Mom," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Elizabeth's hand finally made contact with his cheek, and the touch broke something inside him. Years of carefully constructed walls crumbled as Nathan found himself wrapped in his mother's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and old books that he hadn't known he remembered. "My boy," Elizabeth whispered through tears. "My beautiful boy." Ethan stood quietly by the door, watching the reunion with tears in his own eyes. The morning sun streamed through the bookstore windows, casting a warm glow over the scene. When Elizabeth finally stepped back, she kept one hand on Nathan's arm, as if afraid to lose contact. With her other hand, she beckoned Ethan closer. "My sons," she said softly. "Together again." He led them through the store to a back room that served as both office and reading nook. On one wall stood a shelf filled with wrapped presents, each carefully labeled with Nathan's name and a date. 20 years of birthdays, Christmases, and milestones. "Waiting. I never gave up hope," Elizabeth said, touching one of the packages. "Even when the letters came back unopened, even when William moved you away, I knew someday you'd find your way back." Nathan picked up one of the packages, his 18th birthday. The paper was slightly faded, but the ribbon was still perfectly tied. "Father told me you were dead," he said quietly. "We visited an empty grave every year." Elizabeth's face softened with sadness, but not anger. "I know, sweetheart. Ethan told me. But we don't need that grave anymore. We have today and tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that." The three of them sat together in the cozy back room, surrounded by books and lost time, beginning the delicate process of piecing their family back together. Outside, customers began arriving for the day, but for once, Elizabeth's books and stories would stay closed. Some stories were more important than others. A week after William's discharge from the hospital, Rachel found Nathan in his office. Through the glass walls, they could see Ethan working in the opposite room. A perfect mirror image of Nathan. "There are things I need to tell you," Rachel began, settling into the chair across from Nathan's desk. "About how I met Ethan, and everything that happened after." Nathan set down the file he'd been reviewing. In the afternoon light, he could see the concern in Rachel's eyes. Eyes he once knew so well. "I helped Ethan search for you for 6 months," Rachel continued. "Not because I still had feelings for you, but because I saw in Ethan's eyes the pain of someone who had lost too much. Like I once saw in yours." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I first met him, I thought he was you. He was standing outside my office building in the rain, looking lost. But when he spoke, I knew he wasn't you. He had your face, but his eyes held a different kind of pain." Nathan listened silently as Rachel explained how she'd helped Ethan track down old records, navigate through William's web of lies, and finally find his brother. What had started as compassion for Ethan's quest had grown into something deeper. Something neither of them had expected. Meanwhile, in the hospital's rehabilitation wing, William Miller was learning to walk again, his steps slow but determined. Elizabeth visited daily, bringing books to read aloud, stories of redemption and second chances. The heart attack had shattered more than just his physical strength. It had broken down the walls of pride he'd built around himself. "I want to make things right," William told his sons during their visit. His voice was weaker than before, but carried a new kind of strength. "I've spent 20 years building an empire of lies. Now I want to build something true." He reached for a drawer in his bedside table, pulling out a stack of Elizabeth's unopened letters. "Starting with these, it's time you read them all, Nathan. Time we all faced the truth." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room as father and sons began the slow process of rebuilding their family on a foundation of honesty rather than pride. The evening light filtered through the castle's stained glass windows as Sophia found Nathan in his father's study. He was sitting at the massive oak desk, surrounded by his mother's unopened letters, each one a piece of the past he'd never known. "I made a decision," Sophia said softly, her hand resting on the doorframe. Nathan looked up, his eyes tired but clearer than she'd seen them in days. "I want to be part of this journey with you. Only." Nathan started to speak, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. When I fell in love with you, I fell in love with a man who was trying so hard to be perfect that he'd forgotten how to be real. But now," she moved closer, touching one of the letters on the desk. "Now I'm seeing the real you, Nathan, the one who's brave enough to face his past." She took the engagement ring from her pocket, the one she'd removed at the almost wedding. "I don't want to marry the perfect businessman Nathan Miller. I want to marry the man who's strong enough to rebuild his family, who's learning that vulnerability isn't weakness." In the adjacent room, Ethan sat with William, who had been released from the hospital that morning. The medical equipment had been replaced with comfortable furnishings, but the atmosphere was still heavy with unspoken words. "I spent years being angry," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. "Not just for myself, but for Mom, for Nathan, for all the birthdays and Christmases we lost." William's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered. "Maybe not," Ethan agreed. "But holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Mom taught me that." He paused, looking at his father, really looking at him for the first time in years. "We can't get those years back, but we can choose what to do with the years ahead." The setting sun cast warm shadows across the room as father and son began the delicate process of rebuilding trust. In the study next door, Nathan slipped the ring back onto Sophia's finger, both of them understanding that this wasn't an ending, but a new beginning, one built on truth rather than perfection. Elizabeth insisted on hosting the first real family dinner at her home above the bookstore. The small apartment was filled with the aroma of her cooking, including the chocolate chip pancakes she'd made specially for dessert, remembering how Nathan had loved them as a child. The dining table barely fit them all: Nathan and Sophia, Ethan and Rachel, William in his wheelchair, and Elizabeth moving between kitchen and table with practiced grace. Books lined every wall, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere that felt nothing like the formal dining room at the castle. "I burned the first batch," Elizabeth admitted with a laugh, setting down a plate of golden pancakes. "My hands were shaking too much. It's been 20 years since I made these for both my boys." Nathan caught the slight tremor in her voice, saw how her eyes glistened. Under the table, Sophia squeezed his hand gently. Even William seemed moved, his usual corporate mask completely gone. "Before we eat," Elizabeth said, disappearing into another room, "there's something I need to show you both." She returned carrying a worn leather album, its pages thick with memories. "I kept everything," she explained, opening the album carefully. "Every school photo of Ethan, but with spaces left for Nathan's, every milestone, every memory. I recorded them all, hoping someday we'd fill in the blanks together." The album told two parallel stories: Ethan's documented life alongside the empty spaces where Nathan's should have been. But between these images were other things: pressed flowers from the garden they'd once shared, a small handprint in faded paint, ticket stubs from a carnival they'd visited just weeks before the separation. "The day your father took you, Nathan," Elizabeth said softly, "I promised myself I wouldn't let you disappear completely. Even if I couldn't be with you, I would keep your place in our story." She turned to the album's last pages, revealing recent photos of Nathan from newspapers and business magazines. "I followed your success from afar," she said. "Every article, every photo, they were pieces of you I could hold on to." The room fell quiet as the album passed from hand to hand, each page a testament to a mother's unwavering love and hope. Even William, seeing the physical evidence of the years he'd stolen, had tears in his eyes. "And we can fill in those empty spaces now," Sophia suggested gently. "Create new memories to go alongside the old ones." Nathan nodded, unable to speak as he traced a finger over a small photo of himself and Ethan as toddlers, still together, still whole. The pancakes grew cold on their plates, forgotten in the warm embrace of long-awaited family truths. In William's study, surrounded by decades of business achievements, 3 generations of Millers gathered for what would become the most important family meeting of their lives. William, still looking frail in his wheelchair, finally revealed the truth that had haunted him for 20 years. "I was bankrupt," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just financially, but emotionally. When Elizabeth suggested we start over somewhere smaller, as a family." He paused, hands trembling. "My pride couldn't take it. The thought of people seeing William Miller fail was unbearable, so I chose my reputation over my family." Nathan and Ethan exchanged glances, their identical features reflecting different aspects of the same pain. Elizabeth, sitting quietly by the window, touched the worn edges of her old journal. "I convinced myself I was protecting Nathan from hardship," William continued, "but really I was protecting myself from facing my own failures. The more successful Nathan became, the more I used it to justify what I'd done." The truth finally spoken aloud seemed to lift a weight from the room. It was Elizabeth who broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. "The past is written in stone, William, but the future is still blank pages." 3 days later, Nathan and Ethan stood in the gleaming lobby of Miller Enterprises. But something was different. The company name above the reception desk now read Miller Brothers International. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, looking at the new signage. "You built this company from nothing." Nathan smiled, adjusting his brother's slightly crooked tie, a mirror image of his own. "No, I built it trying to prove something. Now we'll rebuild it together, creating something real." The morning sun streamed through the windows as employees began arriving, doing double takes at the sight of the identical brothers standing side by side. Sophia and Rachel had helped redesign the office, replacing the cold corporate aesthetics with warmth and character. Elizabeth's books lined the conference room walls, and even William had contributed, turning his old office into a collaborative space for charity initiatives. "It's not just about business anymore," Nathan said, watching their family's new story unfold. "It's about building the legacy that really matters, a tribute to the camp and the men who put it all together." As the brothers walked into their first meeting together, their steps perfectly in sync, they knew that some successes couldn't be measured in profit margins or stock prices. The true measure of success was in the healing of old wounds, the strength of renewed bonds, and the promise of a future built on love rather than lies. The transformation of Miller Brothers International was still underway when Nathan and Sophia's rescheduled wedding day arrived. Unlike the grand spectacle originally planned at Rosewood Castle, they chose Elizabeth's bookstore for the ceremony. The intimate space had been transformed with simple white flowers and twinkling lights woven between the bookshelves. "Ready, son?" William asked, adjusting his position in his wheelchair. His hands were steady now as he prepared to escort Sophia down the makeshift aisle between the books. The ceremony was everything the first attempt wasn't. Genuine, intimate, filled with real emotion rather than staged perfection. Elizabeth sat in the front row, tears flowing freely as she watched her sons stand together, Ethan as Nathan's best man. Rachel, as maid of honor, held Sophia's bouquet of white roses from Elizabeth's garden. "Today," Nathan began his vows, his voice strong and clear, "I'm not promising you perfection. I'm promising you truth, growth, and a love that's real enough to embrace both our strengths and flaws." As Sophia said, "I do," a small cheer erupted from the gathered family and close friends. The celebration that followed was warm and joyful, with Elizabeth's chocolate chip pancakes served alongside the wedding cake. The next morning, the Miller brothers arrived early at their office, still riding the wave of happiness from the wedding. The company was flourishing under their combined leadership, Nathan's business acumen perfectly balanced by Ethan's creative vision. "Look at these numbers," Ethan said, spreading out the latest reports. "Our new community outreach program is actually improving our bottom line." Nathan nodded, remembering how their mother's belief in giving back had inspired the initiative. The brothers had transformed their father's cutthroat corporate culture into something more human. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and their ethical business practices were making headlines. "Remember when all this was just about proving something?" Nathan asked, gesturing at the office around them. The space now featured a wall of family photos, including one from yesterday's wedding. "Now it's about building something," Ethan finished his brother's thought. "Something that matters." They worked seamlessly together, their different experiences creating a perfect synergy. Nathan's corporate expertise complemented Ethan's fresh perspective, while Sophia and Rachel's support strengthened both their personal and professional bonds. 1. Following the success of Miller Brothers International and Nathan's intimate bookstore wedding, the family made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months ago. They purchased a sprawling piece of land overlooking the coast, with enough space for 3 homes, one for each generation of Millers. 3 great main halls were built. "It's perfect," Elizabeth said, walking the property with her sons. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and new possibilities. "Close enough for Sunday dinners, but with enough space for everyone to grow. The architects worked closely with each family unit. Nathan and Sophia's modern design complemented Ethan and Rachel's more artistic vision, while Elizabeth's cottage featured a library that rivaled her bookstore. The three homes formed a gentle arc, connected by winding garden paths and shared spaces. "Remember how we used to dream about living by the ocean?" Ethan asked Nathan as they reviewed the construction plans. Their childhood memory, once buried under years of separation, had surfaced during one of their mother's story sessions. Weekend family dinners soon became a tradition, with the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting across the connected gardens. Children from the neighborhood often gathered to hear Elizabeth read stories on her wide porch, while Sophia and Rachel tended the shared vegetable garden. Meanwhile, William's transformation continued to surprise them all. After stepping down as CEO, he discovered a new purpose in life. The man who once measured success in profit margins now spent his days working with local charities, many of which were supported by Miller Brothers International. "I wasted so many years chasing the wrong things," William confided to Elizabeth one evening as they watched their sons and daughters-in-law walking along the beach below. "But seeing them now, together, happy, it's worth more than any business deal I ever made." Elizabeth touched his hand gently, a gesture of forgiveness that still amazed him. "It's never too late to learn what really matters," she said. The three houses stood as a testament to their healing, not separate entities, but parts of a greater whole. The gardens between them had no fences, no boundaries, just like the love that now flowed freely between the once fractured family members. The engagement party was held in the shared garden between the three Miller homes, where twinkling lights wrapped around trees created a magical atmosphere. Rachel and Ethan had chosen this intimate setting over any grand venue, knowing that true celebration wasn't about impressing others anymore. Nathan stood to give his toast, looking at his twin brother and the woman who had helped bring their family back together. Sophia squeezed her husband's hand as he continued, "And now, watching my brother and Rachel together, I see what real love looks like. Not perfect, but perfectly honest." In a word that had never before spoken between them, Paul felt perfectly satisfied. The gathered family members raised their glasses as Rachel and Ethan shared a kiss, their joy reflected in the fairy lights above. Elizabeth watched her sons, tears glistening in her eyes, while William smiled from his chair, finally at peace with the happiness surrounding him. A week after the engagement celebration, the brothers gathered their family again. This time, they led Elizabeth to a small storefront in town, just a few blocks from her beloved bookstore. "What's this?" she asked, puzzled by the mysterious smiles on her sons' faces. "Open it," Ethan encouraged, handing her a key. The door swung open to reveal a beautifully renovated space filled with flowers, the morning sun streaming through large windows. "Your own flower shop," Nathan explained, watching his mother's eyes widen. "We remember you telling us about your dream of working with flowers back when we were kids." Helen nodded. Elizabeth walked through the shop in stunned silence, touching the fresh roses and lilies. The space was perfect, warm, inviting, with a small reading nook in the corner that connected it to her love of books. "We know we can't get back the years we lost," Ethan said softly, "but we can make your dreams come true now." Rachel and Sophia had already arranged for Elizabeth's first wedding flower contract, their own upcoming ceremony. As Elizabeth hugged her sons, her tears falling on their shoulders, the sweet scent of flowers filled the air, with promise of new beginnings. "Now don't forget the unique properties of an oxidative dye spray," Catherine determined later that morning. 1 year after the fateful wedding day that reunited the Miller family, they gathered for a backyard barbecue in the shared gardens of their coastal homes. The transformation from that dramatic day at Rosewood Castle to this relaxed family celebration couldn't have been more striking. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Ethan said, helping Nathan at the grill. The brothers worked in perfect sync, a sight that still amazed their guests. Elizabeth's flower arrangements decorated the tables, mixing with books she'd chosen for each family member, creating centerpieces that told their story. William, more comfortable now in his role as father and grandfather-to-be, shared stories with Rachel about his latest charitable project, a literacy program at local schools, inspired by Elizabeth's love of books. His corporate mask had been replaced by genuine warmth. As the family gathered around the table, Elizabeth raised her glass. "To second chances," she said, her eyes bright with joy. "And to the miracles that brought us back together." The celebration took an unexpected turn when Sophia stood up, holding Nathan's hand. She glanced at her husband, receiving a slight nod, before turning to the family. "We have some news," she began, her free hand resting gently on her stomach. "The Miller family is about to get a little bigger. It took 4 years of trying to have a baby," she sobbed. The announcement was met with tears of joy and embraces. Elizabeth immediately began planning the nursery's flower arrangements while Rachel hugged her sister-in-law tight. But it was the reaction of the brothers that touched everyone's hearts. Elizabeth began with telling them the story of the flower arrangements her mother had worked so hard to produce. "You're going to be an uncle," Nathan said to Ethan, his voice thick with emotion. "We both are," Ethan corrected, pulling his brother into a hug. "This baby will have 2 fathers looking out for them, just like we should have had." William watched his son's embrace, remembering how close he'd come to losing this, the joy of family, the miracle of continuation. Elizabeth moved to stand beside her ex-husband, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. They shared a look of understanding. Their past mistakes had been transformed into stepping stones toward this moment. As the sun set over their shared garden, casting golden light across the 3 homes that now stood as one family's sanctuary, Sophia's news felt like more than just a pregnancy announcement. It was a promise of new beginnings, of stories yet to be written, of a family legacy built on love rather than obligation. Inspired by Sophia's pregnancy news and their growing sense of family legacy, the Millers launched their most meaningful project yet, the Miller Family Foundation. The organization focused on helping children from broken homes, offering educational scholarships and family counseling services. "Every child deserves a chance at a whole family," Nathan explained during the foundation's launch event at Elizabeth's bookstore. The space was filled with supporters, the shelves adorned with flowers from Elizabeth's shop. Ethan and Rachel had designed programs combining education with emotional support, while William contributed his business expertise to ensure sustainability. "This isn't just about giving money," Ethan added, standing beside his brother. "It's about healing families, the way ours heal." Elizabeth ran reading programs for the children, while Sophia, despite her advancing pregnancy, organized family events that brought together parents and children. The foundation quickly became a symbol of hope in the community. Just as the foundation's first scholarship awards were being announced, Sophia went into labor. The entire family gathered at the hospital, the waiting room becoming an impromptu family reunion. Elizabeth brought flowers from her shop, their gentle fragrance calming nervous energy. Rachel and Ethan provided support, while William paced the hallway, his hands clasped behind his back. After several hours, Nathan emerged from the delivery room, tears streaming down his face. "It's a boy," he announced, his voice filled with wonder. "We're naming him William Ethan Miller." The name choice brought tears to both William and Ethan's eyes. When they were finally allowed to visit, Elizabeth found herself holding her grandson, with William beside her in his wheelchair. The baby had Nathan's chin and Sophia's eyes, a perfect blend of their love. "Look what we almost missed," William whispered, touching his grandson's tiny hand. "All those years wasted." "Not wasted," Elizabeth corrected gently. "They led us here, to this moment. Sometimes the longest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations." The baby gripped Ethan's finger as Rachel took photos, capturing the moment when 3 generations of Millers welcomed their newest member. Outside the hospital window, the sun set over their coastal town, painting the sky in colors as rich as their shared future. A month after baby William's arrival, Elizabeth began a special project, a family memoir that would preserve their extraordinary journey. Each evening, she sat in her library, surrounded by books and flowers, crafting their story while the baby slept nearby in his portable crib. Everyone contributed something, Elizabeth explained to visitors at her bookstore, showing them her work in progress. Nathan provided old business papers that now revealed hidden truths. Ethan shared letters he'd written but never sent to his brother. Rachel and Sophia contributed their perspectives as the ones who helped bridge the family's divide. Even William participated, painfully but honestly documenting his mistakes and journey to redemption. "Future generations should know that it's never too late to choose love over pride," he wrote in his chapter. "Shut up and pray will solace you." "Great stuff," quoted Nick Sweet, for his Irish-born editor. Worried Nix was right to worry about the two things coming together. The book became a labor of love, filled with photographs, letters, and memories both painful and joyous. Elizabeth wove their stories together with the skill of someone who had spent a lifetime surrounded by books, creating a narrative that spoke of loss, love, and the courage to begin again. As summer approached, Nathan suggested their first family vacation. They chose a beachside resort, close enough to drive but far from their daily lives. The sight of both brothers teaching their father to navigate his wheelchair through sand brought tears to Elizabeth's eyes. "I never thought I'd see this," she confided to Sophia, who was watching Nathan build sandcastles with baby William. "All of us together, happy, whole." The evenings were spent around a bonfire on the beach, sharing stories that would later find their way into Elizabeth's book. Rachel and Ethan announced their wedding date as the flames danced against the darkening sky. William taught his grandson to roast marshmallows, while Elizabeth read aloud from her manuscript. "Life rarely gives us perfect moments," she read, her voice carrying over the sound of waves. "But sometimes it gives us imperfect moments that are even better because they're real." The family's laughter echoed across the beach, a sound sweeter than any they could have imagined during those years of separation. Baby William, secure in his father's arms, reached for the stars above, unaware that his very existence represented the healing of generations. The transformation in Nathan Miller couldn't have been more profound. The man who once measured success in corporate acquisitions and social status now found his greatest joy in Sunday morning pancake breakfasts with his son, weekly book readings at his mother's store, and quiet evening walks with Sophia along their shared garden paths. Sheep had been her maiden name, and Sophia had been her mother. "You're different," Rachel observed one evening, watching Nathan play with baby William on the beach behind their homes. "More like the Nathan I knew before everything went wrong, but better somehow." Nathan almost laughed aloud. "Yes, except," Nathan smiled, lifting his son to show him a seashell. "I spent years trying to be perfect," he said. "Now I'm just trying to be real." The words echoed across the beach where Ethan was setting up their weekly family barbecue, a tradition that had replaced formal dinners in imposing dining rooms. The upcoming months brought a flurry of activity as Rachel and Ethan's wedding approached. Unlike Nathan's originally planned spectacle at Rosewood Castle, they chose Elizabeth's flower shop for their ceremony. The space had been transformed, with books from the store creating intimate reading nooks between stunning floral arrangements. "Everything's ready," Sophia announced, adjusting baby William's tiny bow tie. She had taken charge of the wedding preparations, working closely with Elizabeth to create something meaningful rather than merely impressive. The guest list was small, but every person present had played a role in their family's journey of healing. The evening before the wedding, Elizabeth hosted a surprise birthday celebration for herself, though everyone knew the real gift was having her entire family together. Her home above the bookstore was filled with laughter, the walls now covered with family photos that showed their journey from brokenness to wholeness. "I have something to share," Elizabeth announced, bringing out her completed family book. The leather-bound volume told their story in all its complexity: the pain of separation, the joy of reunion, the courage to forgive, and the strength to begin again. "This isn't just our story," she said, opening to the first page. "It's a testament to the power of love over pride, truth over perfection." William, now comfortable in his role as a doting grandfather, listened as Elizabeth read excerpts. His eyes filled with tears at the passages describing his mistakes, but swelled with pride at the chapters detailing his journey toward redemption. "The real legacy of the Miller family," Elizabeth read from the final chapter, "isn't found in business empires or social status. It's in the laughter of twins reunited, in the forgiveness offered by children to parents, in the love that rebuilds what pride once broke." Nathan held Sophia close as their son slept peacefully in her arms. Across the room, Ethan and Rachel shared quiet smiles, their wedding rings catching the light. The family had come full circle, from the dramatic interrupted wedding that began their journey to tomorrow's celebration of love and truth. "To beginnings," William raised his glass, his voice strong despite his physical weakness, "and to the wisdom to recognize them, even when they look like endings." The family gathered on Elizabeth's balcony, watching the sun set over their coastal town. The three Miller homes stood as testament to their story, separate but connected, like the hearts that beat within them. Tomorrow would bring another wedding, another chapter in their ongoing story. But tonight was about remembering how far they'd come and dreaming about where love would lead them next. Elizabeth's book lay open on the table, its final words capturing the essence of their journey. In the end, perfection isn't found in flawless facades or carefully constructed images. It's found in the courage to be real, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to know that love, in all its messy, complicated glory, is the only legacy that truly matters. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me for this emotional story. If you enjoyed this tale of family secrets and redemption, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to never miss our latest stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you discovered a twin sibling on your wedding day? Your stories and experiences mean the world to us. Join our growing family of storytellers and story lovers. Every subscribe helps us bring more amazing stories to life. See you in our next video with another unforgettable tale that will touch your heart.